I've been doing some research lately on the 2020 presidential election, and in particular looking at the state of Pennsylvania, in part because it's contested and because I think it's interesting. And I think it's interesting to see what I can find out as a unofficial third-party concerned citizen about the state of the vote count in Pennsylvania. And I think I've found something interesting which I'd like to share with you. Before I do, though, I'm going to set it up by talking about Carla Sands, who's the ambassador to Denmark for the United States. And recently, on Twitter, Carla Sands tweeted this. It's a picture of her Pennsylvania ballot status tracker. And she tweeted this saying that her vote in Pennsylvania wasn't counted. And so she has this picture where she's plugged in her information, first name, last name. She's covered up her date of birth and county. And it's saying at the bottom here, we're unable to match your information with our records. So the vote tracker in Carla Sands' picture is saying she didn't vote. She lost her vote. So the New York Times did a follow-up story on this, where they actually found Carla's real information and they plugged it into this vote tracker, and they found that, Carla did vote. Maybe she mistyped her birthday, or she selected the wrong county or something, used the wrong format for her birthday, who knows? Or maybe she really did just fake it to get attention. But the point is, the reason why I'm talking about this is because it's representative, or it's illustrating that you can use this Pennsylvania Department of State election ballot status tracker to determine whether people voted or not. The New York Times used it to confirm that Carla Sands actually did cast a vote and that her vote was counted. So that's an interesting thing to know, and I'm going to bring that fact up again in just 1 second. Let me take another aside, though, and let's look at what is the vote count in Pennsylvania. How many of the votes have they counted? Well, they have this neat voting dashboard available on the Votes PA website, and what we can see is that they claim they have 98.38% counted. So they're almost entirely counted. I will note, though, that this number has stayed about the same for the past couple days. So who knows if they're continuing to count. They're almost entirely counted in Pennsylvania. That's the point. And they actually break it down by county here as well, all the different counties in Pennsylvania. Now, right away, you can kind of notice something that I think is pretty abnormal. Some of these counties are very good at counting. In fact, they're so good at counting, they've counted more than 100% of their ballots. 100.8 here, 100.2. Here's a county that's counted 103%. Someone else over 100. There are a number of counties. This county has over nearly 102%. There are a number of counties that have counted more ballots than they received. Now, of course, you're looking at these numbers as I am, and you see that these numbers are relatively small. They counted plus 50 ballots here. There's an additional 324 ballots in this county, an additional 16 here. These are very small numbers. So the vote count in Pennsylvania, the difference in the vote count is in the tens of thousands. It's about 60,000 votes. So just miscounting by a few hundred here, a few hundred there, obviously that's not going to make a major difference in a contest that's being decided by tens of thousands of votes. But that's not really what's an issue here. There are a couple things wrong with the fact that you're reporting more than 100% of your ballots counted. The most immediate thing wrong with it is that it shows you can't count correctly, that you don't realize that you should never have a negative number of mail-in ballots remaining. It shows you can't count correctly. And the fact that you can't count correctly, that kind of calls into question your entire set of results. So in other words, it's not just that you have an additional plus 58, but it's probably that you didn't follow the process of counting correctly, and you've probably made some more mistakes. Because if you did follow a logical process for counting, if you did count correctly, this result would literally be impossible. So we know they're not counting correctly right off the bat. Analogously, if you handed someone a deck of cards, 52 cards, and you said, sort these into the red and the black piles and tell me which color has more. and they came back and said, well, black has 35 and red has 30, so black has more. Well, you would know not to trust their counting because they have the wrong number of cards. They're adding up to 65 cards instead of 52. And it's the same kind of thing here. Like right away, just looking at their dashboard, we can tell Pennsylvania isn't counting correctly. But then there's another like level 2 kind of error when you start to think about this. And what I mean is, it's not just that they're not counting correctly, but it's that they didn't even notice. Like this is, I say didn't even notice. I can't say whether or not they noticed or not. But this is their public-facing voter dashboard for a contested presidential election in which Pennsylvania is a battleground state that is flipped back and forth and is currently either in or about to be in a legal dispute. And they're reporting that they have negative ballots remaining, that they've counted more than 100% of their ballots. So they aren't being precise. They aren't being careful. They aren't counting correctly. And their sloppiness isn't just about counting, it's about reporting too. You know, if I were in charge of the Pennsylvania Department of State, or if I were in charge of counting the votes for Pennsylvania, and a county reported that they had 103%, they were 103% complete, I'd probably ask them to count again, because I can't really trust you if you're giving me numbers that are simply impossible. Yeah, even if you're only off by 28, I just can't trust that. So the fact that nobody's asking them to count again, or that their systems don't force them to enter in numbers that make sense, that tells us something's wrong. That's the level 2. They aren't even paying attention. Level 1, they can't count correctly. Level 2, they don't even notice it. And they're reporting on this kind of major contest numbers that are simply unintelligible. Well, yeah, I think that's right. Unintelligible. You can't make sense of what these numbers actually mean. So I talked a little bit too much about that, but that really kind of rubs me the wrong way that they're being so careless here. But let's look at this first county, Armstrong County. They're reporting, well, the first county to report more than 100%, I should say. They issued 8,800 ballots. They've counted 7,131. Let me flip back over here to my presentation. Armstrong County got extra credit. They did more than 100% of their counting. So let's look into Armstrong County. As we saw from the New York Times and Carla Sands story, we can use the Pennsylvania ballot status tracker to look up people's information and see if they cast a ballot or not. It's also a useful fact to know that voter registration is public record. Now, I don't know if public record is the precise legal term to use for it, but it's information that's available to the public, even if you sometimes have to pay a fee to get it. So it's not always free, but it is accessible to any citizen who wants it. So the other important fact is that there aren't that many people in Armstrong County. We were just looking and we saw there were only 8,000 mail-in votes, and that means there aren't that many people, or at least that implies there aren't that many people. So what we can do, this final bullet point, is let's just check all of Armstrong County. And when I say let's check, I mean let's use the ballot status tracker to check the status of all registered voters in Armstrong County. Now, how can we do that? Well, how can we do that? That's a good question. Here we have a list of all the registered voters in Armstrong County. Now, we don't know which way these people voted. We only know what party they were registered to. We know their first name, their last name, their date of birth, the county they live in, and we can use the status tracker to check, to plug this information in. So we can just take a first name, last name, date of birth, and county, and we can plug that information in. Here, let's do that with someone who we have a vote recorded result for. Melinda. We can plug this information in and see what their status is. So 08/26/1984. 08/26/1984. And the county, of course, is Armstrong. The county, of course, is Armstrong. There we go. So vote recorded. That's what my tracking page here says. And yeah, so we can do this for all of the 44,000 registered voters of Armstrong County. And when we do that, 44,824. When we do that, we can see some things that are probably pretty intuitive to you, which is that most people didn't vote. And this information, the ballot status tracker, is only for mail-in ballots. So we only have information about whether they voted with a mail-in ballot or not. We don't know if anybody voted in the polls. But mail-in ballots is what the dashboard I was showing you a minute ago said. So we can see there are some different statuses for people. That's what's in this column G that I have highlighted right now. Some votes are marked vote recorded, and some votes are marked pending. And there's a tiny number of votes that have a different status. I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. But if we look at the total number up here in the upper right-hand column, we can look and see that here we have 7,039 votes recorded in our big list of votes recorded. 7,039 votes recorded, which compares to what it says on the Pennsylvania dashboard, 7,131. We have slightly fewer, but it's at least in the same ballpark. We're at least close enough to be somewhat reasonable, meaning that we're probably talking about the same number. And the reason I say that is because it's something of a question. How do we know that ballots counted, that they aren't including pending ballots and vote recorded ballots? So those two statuses I showed you, vote recorded, the other status being pending that some ballots have. Well, we can guess that pending ballots probably aren't a part of their counted ballots because we see over 1,600 pending ballots. So 7,039, we're pretty close to their number for ballots counted, plus an additional 1,600, we'd be way off. We'd be way over them. So in other words, what I'm saying is that ballots counted refers to the ballots that are marked vote recorded. I think that's pretty reasonable to guess. And ordinarily, I'd assume that I made a mistake in doing the vote checking or in tabulating things, except for the fact that Armstrong County has demonstrated they can't count. So if the numbers are slightly off, I can only attribute that to perhaps some discrepancy in our systems or methods, or perhaps Armstrong County just doesn't count that well. But that said, let's go on with the presentation. So I'll talk a little bit more about Armstrong County. 45,000 registered voters. 8.7 thousand of those 45 voted by mail. And that's the information that we have access to. So Armstrong County itself is mostly a Democrat county. That's what we're showing here. And again, when I say mostly Democrat, I mean mostly people registered Democrat. And that breaks about 56% to 44. Again, we don't know how they voted. We just know what party they are registered to. And we know that as a part of the publicly available voter registration data. So, are all the votes counted? Well, Armstrong County reports on the Pennsylvania Department of State dashboard that they've counted more than 100% of the votes. Are they right? Of course not. What I found checking using the ballot status tracker is that actually most of the votes are counted, but only about 80% of the votes are counted. My graph is just slightly cut off here at the edge of the screen. That the rest of that number says votes, or the rest of this says votes recorded, 80%. So 80% counted. This yellow shape here is like a yellow light because they're pending. These votes haven't been decided yet. 18.7, 19% of mail-in votes are still pending in Armstrong County. And then just a tiny negligible amount have the status marked canceled. So I already mentioned this, the fact that just comparing the numbers, 7,131, it's comparable. We're probably talking about the same thing. And we've got 1,600 votes that we're not talking about, that aren't showing up and counted. Those votes are marked pending. So is there anything unusual about the pending votes? Yes, there is. Thank you. I'm glad I asked. And what's unusual is that Democrat votes are more likely to be counted than to be left in pending. So what do I mean by that? I wish I had included a graph, but I didn't. Let me actually show you my graph for this, which I meant to include. This is the pending percentage by party graph, where I'm comparing Democrats on the left side and Republicans on the right side. And what we see is that Democrat votes, votes from voters who are registered in the Democrat Party, 87% of these votes are marked vote recorded. Only 13% of the Democrat votes are left in the pending state. And that's pretty different to what we see in the Republican Party, where 74% of Republican registered votes are marked as vote counted, and 26% of Republican registered votes are left in the pending state. So I would say, from what I can tell by reading the dashboard and looking at this data, that 26% of Republican votes, mail-in votes, haven't been counted in Armstrong County. And that's substantially greater than the 13% of Democrat mail-in ballots that haven't been counted in Armstrong County in Pennsylvania, according to how I interpret this data. So that is a strange difference. As I said, 87 and 13% counted, as I showed you with that graph that I should have included in the slide. Republican votes are about 3 times as likely to be pending. So I should have double-checked my math here. Of course, this is 2, not 3 times. The difference between 13 and 26. Now I can't be too mad at Armstrong for miscounting, except mine is a YouTube presentation I've hastily thrown together, and Armstrong County is reporting on the President of the United States, counting votes. So I want to wrap this up by just asking, what is the cause of this? And to be frank, I don't know. I can speculate or list some possibilities, and the 4 I came up with are that there's some mismatch or status out of date between the Pennsylvania voter dashboard and the ballot status tracker. So one of these things is old or out of date. Maybe the dashboard has newer information. Maybe the status tracker does. And maybe that mismatch is somehow influencing these results I'm seeing. Now, that's not a great explanation to me because it doesn't explain why there's apparently partisan differences. So if the ballot status tracker were out of date, why would that seemingly have more of an impact on Republican registered voters than on Democrat ones? I don't know. I can't answer that. The next explanation I thought of is that I'm somehow misinterpreting. I shouldn't say somehow. That's prejudicing your interpretation. The next possibility is that I'm misinterpreting the meaning of some of these terms. So I believe that pending votes aren't counted, but perhaps pending means something else that I wasn't able to find. Pending means something else, and that pending votes really are counted and are included in the total, and that, like the 1,600 pending votes that I found, really are being counted. That's a possibility. I found no evidence for it, and again, it doesn't really address why more Republicans are in pending than Democrats. But maybe that's possible, or maybe I'm misinterpreting something else that I can't think of. A third possibility is that my sample size is just too small to be representative. So when I say that, I mean I only have 8,000 actual votes that I looked at. We checked 45,000 registered voters and only found 8,000 mail-in ballots. And you know, in the grand scheme of things, that's obviously a very small number. And so possibly these results I'm seeing are just noise. And I can't think of any reason, of any explanation for that that could refute that. Possibly that is just noise. I suppose if I wanted to get technical, I could try to investigate how likely this would be to come about by chance, but I haven't done that. What I think the next step is to do a larger investigation, look at a larger county, and let's go from 8,000 votes to 80,000. And then, ask, do we see the same trend? So I am working on that even now. The final possible explanation is just what I've said here, that there's some unknown force or pressure that's causing Democrat votes to preferentially be counted compared to Republican votes. In other words, you might imagine someone says, count Democrat votes, leave Republican votes alone. If the people counting the votes had access to the same voter information that I do, or that any interested public citizen does, then they could just choose to leave Republican votes in a state where they aren't actually counted. And this pressure, however it's exerted, by a person or algorithmically, or a collection of people, however this pressure is exerted, or systemically, if there's something about the voting system that causes this to happen, this pressure would actually create the results that I am seeing, I think. If there's some force causing Republican votes to be left in pending, well, that's exactly what I've seen. So that's going to wrap up the presentation from me. If you're interested in this, let me know by saying something in the comments so I know you watched. Click the like button and subscribe. And if you want to see more content in a similar style, I think I'll probably publish my findings when I look at a bigger county. And I may look at a couple other counties just to see if this trend holds true. And again, by this trend, I mean, are Republicans, well, I guess that's the key graph that I don't actually have. Are Republicans more likely to be left in pending than Democrats? 2-1. Anyway, I'm ending it here. Thanks a lot for your time. Bye-bye.